Okay, welcome to the Toolset meeting, or more appropriately, welcome to astronaut selection, because that's what we're going to be doing. I guess it's not Marstronaut. I guess astronaut is still universal. So, I guess I have all sorts of power here. Okay, so what we're going to be doing today, and actually let me go ahead and flip over to the presentation. This is going to be a highly interactive session, but we want to set some things up real quick. A lot of moving pieces in this, and this is a two-parter. We're going to do a similar activity tomorrow, except that we're going to do it on a little bit more fast forward, give you all a few more controls. Today, we're going to walk you into it a little bit and get you started. But let me jump over to the presentation here real quick. All right. So I guess I could play this. All right. Okay, here we go. All right. Looks like I can still see everything. Yay. All right. So what you have entered is a nexus of tools and ideas and teaching. And what we're going to be doing in this session is working out what tools we're going to need to use to teach in the new learning environments we're going to create on Mars. And one of the themes of this session is we have a lot of options nowadays when it comes to tools. It's not just about a blackboard and a piece of chalk anymore, and maybe the occasional movie projector and transparency. We have a huge range of options, and we want to be able to take advantage of the whole spectrum, because we're going to need that. We're going to need to be very efficient. We're going to need to be very effective when it comes to how we teach our students on Mars. So let's talk about where we've come from and where we're going. This project has actually been around for a couple of years now, but it's reshaped itself on a couple of occasions. First of all, this kind of started out literally on the eve of the pandemic. And when I started playing around with this idea of trying to figure out how tools shape our actual teaching. And the idea there was that, to try to understand it. Just a little background, I'm a social scientist by training. So I tend to think about how humans and groups tend to shift over in different contexts and different systems. And one of the systems that we work in is a system of tools that impact, what we can get away with doing in the classroom or online. And so one of the questions that I asked first off was, how do these tools actually change how we teach or and affect the different modes in which we teach? Then last year, it kind of shifted in a different direction now that we had some sort of understanding of how tools can shape, whether we lecture, whether we do collaborative learning, whether we do constructivist learning. Now the question is, okay, well, let's start out with, I want to do this kind of learning. And we introduced Diana Laurelard's 6 teaching modalities or tools, or however she wants to refer to them. Ruben's going to go over those in a minute. And then looked at how we can find tools to execute acquisition, inquiry, practice, production, and so on and so forth. And then this year, we added yet another piece. Last year's was very much a free form exercise, and you can look at the resulting Miro graphic. There's a link to it right there. These slides are going to be available to everybody. I'm going to drop a link in the chat in a minute when I stop talking and hand it over to one of my fearless co-hosts. But you can see what we did last summer. We'd had a number of brainstorming sessions where we took each one of those different modalities and thought about how does this affect online learning versus in-person learning versus XR learning. And some very interesting ideas came out of it. This year, we found some lovely partners among our friends at SUNY, where they have developed the EmTech database, which is a database of actual tools. And so what we're going to be doing today is asking this question of how do we connect up those tools, real tools that they have collected, and oh, by the way, you can add to the database, with methods of teaching. and what we're trying to accomplish in the classroom. Because what we need to do for our Mars mission is to come up with the most efficient sets of tools to get us and more importantly, our students where they need to be at the end of the learning process. Where we're going with this, which is the light blue boxes, is that we're hoping to develop, first of all, we're going to develop hopefully out of this session, and we'll have a follow-up session in July where we'll be fine-tuning things, a website with a limited selection of tools that support different types of learning activities. But ultimately, what we'd like to be able to build is a publication, and that's pending funding. But one of the ways in which we hope to get funding is by building this website and taking a look at giving people the ability to take a look at what we're looking at building, and ultimately building the Nexus report. Hopefully that would come out sometime next year. So that's where we're going, where we've been. These pages are just sort of mock-ups of some ideas about how you might create such a report and what that might look like. We're not going to actually have you create those pages this time, but moving right along to my science fiction. Hopefully he has returned from other planets and is ready to discuss, and let me know when you're ready for me to flip slides.
All right, so thank you, Tom. So yeah, so very briefly, I want to introduce two tools that we're going to be using today. The first one is LaurelArt's conversation framework and learning types. And what LaurelArt has been working on for several years now is a question of what are the interactions between learners, teachers, environments, and peer groups. And you can see the result right here, where you have the concepts that are held by a teacher, the concepts that are held by a learner, and the concepts that are held by the peer group are three distinct spheres. And then the environment that the learning takes place in, the practice that the learners make of what they learn, what they do, etc., and the practice that the peer group makes are all an additional three categories. So what LaurelArt has identified is these 6 categories, which I think are pretty self-explanatory, so I won't dwell very long in them, that mediate the interactions between these groups. So for instance, mediating between teacher and learner concepts, we have acquiring concepts from the teacher to the learner. Then the learner inquires about additional concepts, things they feel they need to know, etc. And then they eventually produce their own concepts from that. Similarly, when we have the interaction between the learner and the peer group of their concepts, there's a discussion process that involves sharing, talking about them, etc. And then finally, you have, for the other 2 elements, peer practice and learner practice are mediated by collaboration, collaborating practices, and the learning environment and learner practice are mediated by, well, exactly when the learner makes things. So the difference, by the way, between producing and practicing is that in producing, we're talking about the creation of concepts. In practicing, we're talking about not just the elaboration of new concepts, but all different aspects of what the learner is making, creating within that environment. So these are the ones that you have here. Patrick, investigation is closest to inquiring in this framework. And there are some nuances. If you go, this is the simplified version of the framework that LaurelArt developed more recently. If you go back to the original papers, there are more subsets and more additional arrows, if you will, that pick up some of the nuances, for instance, of what you're bringing up with investigation. That's an excellent point. So basically, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using these 6 aspects to say, well, look, in any given unit of instruction, in any given project, you're going to stress some of these over some of the others, but obviously you will have some of them at least explicitly available or explicitly readily incorporated into your design. Because otherwise what you can find sometimes is that if none of these are particularly highlighted or mediated by tools, they can fall by the wayside or become, for lack of a word, dilute. So this is the first set of concepts we're going to be using. We're going to be using LaurelArt's conversation framework and learning types. Tom, if you can switch me to the next slide. Thank you. So the second model we're going to be using is the SAMR model. The SAMR model is a model that I developed to say, well, look, what type of practices have a large impact upon student outcomes? And again, there's multiple refinements to what you can do with the model, how to look at it. But for today's purposes, we're going to use the most basic version, which is the substitution level is when you're using a new technology to do exactly what you were doing before. And the augmentation level is when you're using the technology to do what you were doing before, but you enhanced it a little bit. So for instance, instead of having to rewrite things by hand, you have a word processor, so it's easier to create drafts, etc. Or you have greater facility and be able to visualize things, but you're still visualizing exactly the same things you were doing before and so on. So these two lower levels are what are called the enhancement levels, and they tend to have relatively small or negligible to small impact upon student outcomes. But the upper two levels, modification and redefinition, are the ones that have large impact upon student outcomes. So at the modification level, you're talking about not just having the same task, but redesigning the task. So for instance, if before you had a student writing an individual essay, now they're creating social writing that they share with the group using technologies in new and interesting ways that you couldn't have done before. So it's no longer just the essay they're turning into you, but really rather something that is a mode of social communication. At the redefinition, you're creating a new task that would have been inconceivable without the tool, without the technology at hand. And these two upper levels are what are called the transformation levels, and these have large impacts, medium to large impacts upon student outcomes. So for today's task, we're going to be asking you for at least some of the aspects of the task, Tom will talk more about that in just a second, to try to make sure that your use of the technology is at these upper two levels, the transformation levels. And don't worry, I'll be here to consult on both the lower Lord and this. But the key thing is twofold. Number one, as Tom said, if you were sending a mission to Mars, all of these things can be useful, make no mistake, but you have to do a triage. And if you want to go to Mars, you don't have a lot of spare resources, so you want to get maximum bang for the buck. But the second aspect, which we won't be talking about today, but I want to point out to you, is that the upper two levels are associated with anti-fragility, whereas the lower two levels are more associated with resilience. All of those things are good, but again, you'd like to move to anti-fragility in the structures you design, rather than just simple resilience. So those are the two models you're going to be using. You're going to see how in just a second, but I wanted to introduce them. So Tom, it's back to you.
Sorry about that. Lost track of where the control bar was. Okay, moving right along. The next piece of the puzzle is going to be, where are you going to find these tools? And for that, we have our erstwhile teammates here in the astronaut selection committee, Robin and Nicole, who will walk you through their wonderful database that we're going to be scavenger hunting in today.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. And the slide in front of you is all about the State University of New York's Exploring Emerging Technologies for Lifelong Learning and Success initiative. I'm going to describe it in 60 seconds or less. It is a freely available online learning opportunity. It is discovery learning to be creative about the use of emerging technologies. For short, I'm going to refer to it as EmTech. And it has two parts to it. We are going to focus mainly on the EmTech Wiki, which is a socially curated set of tools, tutorials, and resources. There's a little bit more than 500 records in there. You can see the URL in the chat. Thank you to my colleague, Nicole, who put that in there. And she's going to talk about how to navigate the wiki to find the tools based on the task or objective that your group is going to work on. And the other part is the EmTech MOOC. Just going to briefly describe it. It's you participate, explore, and then you share artifacts in a portfolio. But for today, we're mainly concerned with the wiki. Both of these are organized around lifelong learning and the 21st century skills of communication, collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking. So the URL for those that might be listening in is SUNY, that's SUNY.edu/EMTECH. And Nicole is going to introduce how you navigate that database of tools in the wiki to fulfill the activities of today. Go ahead, Nicole, next to you.
Thank you, Robin. So welcome, Space Explorers. We are going to take a look at using our socially curated EmTech wiki, which is very simple to use. You'll see along the mid part of the page, the 4 blue boxes: lifelong learning, communication, collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking. Those, again, like Robin said, are the 4 C's of 21st century learning. They will also help you to whittle down some of the wiki resources and records so that you can explore and use the appropriate technologies. On the left-hand side, you'll see the different filters that you were able to filter down and do a deeper dive into specific tech tools that you could use to explore technologies. You can also access them by categories. And the categories, again, are shown on the blog bubble that will help you figure out which are the best to help you with your task. You also have an option to search the modules in general if you know of certain tools. And what that'll do is allow you to find out the different tags that are associated with each of the emerging technologies and how they can help best support your activity and your goal.
Okay, are we moving on? All right. Last piece of the puzzle here is this, going back to the origins here of what we started, what the project started with, and the idea that we want to try to define our tasks before we select our technologies. So as you are considering your mission, or as you're working through your mission, first of all, it's important that you want to establish your task or goal. Now, for this first day, we've gone ahead and given you some sample tasks, so you can then go dive straight into the database and look for tools. You know, feel free to tweak those tasks if you feel like you want to make some slight changes, but we wanted to give you a head start. Tomorrow, we're going to let you build the tasks first, and then go from there. Ask yourself the questions of how technology would reshape, you know, what you're doing by manipulating the technology in the idea spaces rubric is primarily a space consideration, but technology also shifts time, and we can use it to change how we experience time, how our students are able to use time synchronously, asynchronously, in various ways. And then also think about how this would fit into a larger structure of, you know, these are really great tools, but they don't fit with our normal class structure. So consider how those things are shifting as you also, as a way of also thinking about your, you know, the SAMR model and what that means, you know, what that redefinition means. And then ultimately you want to find technology that makes things better, because we're going to have to grow really smart students to help us terraform Mars and create environments where humans can survive long term. That's going to be the mission of the education system. We're not going to be able to tolerate substandard pedagogy when it comes to those sorts of things, and our tools need to help us do that and help our students learn ultimately. Okay, so step 1, identify tasks. Step 2, find tools in the wiki. And then step 3 is create a rationale. Now, you're really only going to be doing steps 2 and 3 today, because we're going to already have identified tasks. Now, each one of you has been given access to the slide deck for those latecomers. Let me drop it here again so you can find your way there. You'll be randomly assigned to a break room. Each group is, here's some ideas for thinking about. So there's a blue team. There's going to actually be 2 blue teams, 2 green teams, and 2 gold teams because of the number of people we have. So if you are in blue team number 1, this is your work slide. And then, so we've given some ideas here again with combining several of the Laurillard prompts here. And then here's blue team number 2. and so on and so forth, and some reference slides to help you out. And we'll be filtering through the breakout rooms as well to help you out. So with that in mind, let's beam everybody into their rooms. It is now 11:30. We want to leave about 10 minutes to debrief. But obviously with the deck, we will have a permanent record of your activities, which we can continue to work off going forward. So Stephanie, if you would please press the button and zap people into their alternate realities.
All right, everyone has been invited to join their room, so please click on the blue join button.